Ladies and gentlemen, delighted to welcome you to the Baker Institute. This is one of a series of events that bring interesting folks to talk to interested people. I encourage all of you to take a look at our website, bakerinstitute.org, which contains a schedule of our events, who we've got coming. When we have new arrivals, we post it on the site. I also encourage all of you who are not members of our roundtable to consider joining. It's the support of our roundtable that makes events like these and others possible. So again, thank you. Tonight's Director's Lecture Series features former United States Senator Phil Gramm, you're always a senator, who will discuss his new book, The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. Senator Graham's distinguished career has bridged academia, public service, and of course finance. He represented Texas for 24 years in Congress, first in the House of Representatives, then in the Senate, where he authored landmark legislation, including the Gramm-Latta budget, the Gramm-Rudman-Hollings Deficit Reduction Act, a hot topic right now. That would be deficit and reduction. And the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which modernized financial services. Before entering public life, he taught economics at Texas A&M, and after leaving the Senate, he served as vice chairman of UBS Investment Bank. Over the course of his career, Senator Gramm has been a leading voice on economic freedom, fiscal discipline, and the power of markets to expand opportunity. Joining him this evening is Dr. John Diamond, the Edward A. and Hermana Hancock Kelly Senior Fellow in Public Finance, Director of the Baker Institute's Center for Public Finance, and Professor of Economics at Rice University. John is one of the nation's leading experts on tax and budget policy. He has authored and co-edited numerous books, including Pathways to Fiscal Reform in the United States and Fundamental Tax Reform Issues, Choices, and Implication. John has testified before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, Joint Economic Committee, and multiple state legislators. Together, Senator Gramm and John bring deep expertise in fiscal policy, economics, and public finance. Now, in The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Senator Gramm offers a powerful defense of American capitalism, challenging conventional wisdom in 7 key areas of economic history, what he and his author call the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. I hope, John, during the course of this discussion with the Senator, we can unpack the thrust of your book, Senator. Please join me. We don't say howdy here, but see, I'm instructed in foreign languages that extend well beyond the Middle East and Europe in welcoming Senator Phil Gramm and Dr. John Diamond. Thank you all for coming.
So I'll just start. You mentioned my joint economic testimony. I was actually on the panel with Senator Gramm, and that was actually a great honor. And we had Kevin Hassett up there with us, and I think we're both a little confused by him.
He's singing different songs.
Yes, and we're going to talk about one of his songs when we get to the trade chapter. But let me first just say, if you don't have the book, get it. And if you get it and you haven't read it, you're really doing yourself a disservice. As someone who's studied economics a long time, I learned a lot from this book, and it immediately jumped into one of my favorite books of all time. Really a fascinating read that challenges conventional thoughts that I had, and I've just figured out I was wrong. So thank you for that. That leads me to the most important question. Why did you write this book? And how did you come up with such a great idea?
Well, before I answer that question, I think given that I'm at the Baker Institute, I ought to say that Jim Baker is the most effective public servant that I ever served with. And I'll share a story with you about Jim Baker. I was the author of the Reagan program in the House. David Stockman and I had offered a bipartisan recovery budget the year before Reagan came, and then Stockman became OMB director, and our budget became the Reagan budget. And suddenly, my third year in Congress, I was the author of the Reagan program, and as it turned out, was majority leader because we had 26 conservative Democrats, and with the Republicans, we made a majority. And we were trying, obviously, to put everything together and knowing that the vote, we were going to win or lose by a handful of votes. And so, as we were in the debate, the Louisiana delegation came to see me and said, John Brough was the leader of the delegation, that if I would commit that and get Reagan to commit that we would leave the sugar program alone, that they would not only vote for final passage, but the intention was to go into the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union and try to gut the bill in individual votes before we got the final passage. So anyway, I went to see the president, and I explained to him what Baker had, what had been proposed. Baker was in the meeting, and so the president said to me, well, what's your reaction to this? And I said, well, I didn't come here to save the sugar program. And I hate the sugar program. And so, if you don't know, we pay twice the market price for sugar, so 3,400 sugar producers can be rich. If you bring it right down to what it's about. And so, anyway, you've got to remember I'm 3 years out of the college classroom, so I'm pretty emotional about this. And so the president says, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think we would probably get all of their votes on final passage, but we may lose the essence of the program before we ever get there. And while I hate like hell to do it, I think it's a deal we've got to make. And so the president says, well, you don't hate doing it any more than I hate doing it. And so Baker said, what's wrong with you guys? When y'all are dead and gone, the sugar program will still be the law of the land. Well, sure enough, the president's dead and gone. I'm closely following behind. And with the speaker and the majority leader, both from Louisiana, the sugar program looks like it's going to be here when I'm gone. But Baker was a great public servant. Your question. I've been involved in the public policy debate for about 50 years, and first in academics and then in government. And it's always amazed me how people can look at the same facts and come to such different conclusions. Thomas Jefferson said, good men with the same facts are prone to disagree. But what I have discovered over the years is that if you probe people with very different views about the role of government in a free society, you're going to find they have totally different conceptions about how the world works and about what the lessons of history are. Look at Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is intelligent. He's totally honest, something I've always respected. And yet his view is 180 degrees out of sync from mine. And I have concluded from having looked at this in detail now for 50 years that people have different views about the role of government because they have different conceptions about how the world works, about what the lessons of history are. And they also have different life experiences. Now, I don't know what Bernie's experience was. He grew up in Brooklyn, and he was in an upper middle income family. Nobody in my family had ever graduated from high school until my brother graduated from high school. I threw the newspaper in the richest part of the town I grew up in, and it was obvious to me why they were living in those big houses and we were living in a very small house, because they made good decisions. They worked hard, and they had sharper tools than we did. That is, they were well educated. I saw markets working everywhere, and I saw opportunity waiting to be picked up. And so if somebody were going to try to convince me that the system is rigged, which Bernie believes, and that you're limited in what you can achieve based on where you came from, who you are, they'd have to get up mighty early in the morning. The life I've lived would make it virtually impossible for me to ever reach that conclusion. And so I can't change what people's life experience was, but I have found in talking to people with very different views that they have a very different view of what happened in the Industrial Revolution. They believe the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. They have a very different concept of progressive era regulation. They think it worked. We repealed it in my first 2 years in Congress because it didn't work. They think the Depression was a failure of American capitalism and greed. I think it was a failure of government. And this whole debate about trade and the hollowing out of manufacturing, totally different conception of what happened and is happening now. And then what caused the financial crisis. And then the two contemporary issues of poverty, which is so difficult to understand in the context of America, and income inequality. So what the book does is it sets out the undisputed facts, and then it presents what I call the myth. And normally, it quotes the best-selling high school textbook and the best-selling college history textbook as part of the myth. And it presents the myth in the strongest form that we could write it. In fact, people reading the book thought that it was a mistake to do what we were doing, but I didn't want to be accused of setting up a straw man and then tearing them down. And then we set about to debunk the myth. So that's how the book works, its structure, and the reason I wrote it. I had heard about Don Boudreaux, who has a chair at George Mason, because he was the best student of someone who taught with me long, long ago at Texas A&M. And so he died during the writing of my last book. I wrote it with me and said I needed to get to know Boudreaux. So I read his stuff, and when I had this idea, I still work. I have a young wife who wants money and would put me in a cheap nursing home if I quit working. And so I couldn't do it by myself. And so I explained the idea to him, and he thought it was a good idea, and we did it.
So let's break this. Let's break some of these chapters. Let's break these 7 myths down. Let's start with your Wall Street Journal op-ed from a couple of days ago on AI and prosperity in America, combined with, I guess I would combine them with the Genesis myth and the regulatory Chapter 2 myths. So why don't you share those myths with us and then tell us about your view of AI, and should we be scared of it? Should we, because we're going to talk about regulation, to what, should we regulate it at all? Should we try to make it more complementary with labor? and less substitutable with labor? What is the policy? How should we implement policy with this new technology?
Well, let me begin by saying that we don't know anything about the future. The only thing we know anything about is the past. And the Genesis myth in this book is so important because we're getting ready to relive the whole thing again with AI. The Industrial Revolution was the most traumatic and creative period in the history of mankind on this earth. Karl Marx, in his genius, saw the Industrial Revolution more clearly than anybody else. He saw the massive creation. As Karl Marx said, capitalism in one generation has created more productive forces than all other generations combined. But in doing so, it had destroyed the old feudal system. Nothing was permanent. The old guild system was totally non-competitive. The industrial system that existed prior to the building of mechanized manufacturing in Britain was totally non-competitive. And so you had a wave of creative destruction that occurred. And the creative part is easy to define. In America, the Industrial Revolution was delayed because of the war, Civil War. But in 30 years, gross national product tripled. The population doubled. 30 million people came to this country looking for opportunity and freedom, found both. Per capita income doubled in 30 years. Wages rose by 173%. Lifespan grew by 25%. By the staples of life, housing, food, anyway, the staples of life, housing, food, and clothing, all in real dollar terms, in number of hours worked, fell in half. There are no people who had ever lived on the face of the earth saw their well-being grow by more quicker than happened in America during the Industrial Revolution. In Britain, similar thing happened, but over a longer period of time. And yet, Arnold Toynbee, one of the great historians of the 19th century, wrote, "The Industrial Revolution was the darkest era through which any nation had ever passed." Henry George, the economic journalist, in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, there's a room that has all the industrial giants in it. It's got Henry George's picture there. And he has on a plaque his judgment of the Industrial Revolution. The rich got richer, the poor grew helpless, and the middle class was blown away. Now, how do you square that with the facts, undisputed facts that I just outlined? Well, you explain it in that the Industrial Revolution was a wave of creation that created massive wealth and increased well-being, but it destroyed the old system. And the people who had to change were opposed to the new system. You've probably heard of Luddites. Well, they were highly skilled artisans that made textiles prior to the Industrial Revolution. They rioted and started destroying machines in British factories. And the British had to call out the army and impose a death penalty for destroying industrial equipment in order to put down the riot. You've all read, the Song of the Shirt, a poem, most moving line of the English language to me. Oh God, that bread should be so dear and flesh and blood so cheap. They're talking about the Industrial Revolution. And it's easy for us to see the negative wave because we're so rich now compared to then, we forget how rich they were as compared to their parents and grandparents. And then Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, one of the great books ever written. He only knew what he had seen in the past. He couldn't see what the future was. And in the past, he saw 1,500 years where there'd been no real economic growth. People lived like their grandparents had lived, a short and hard life. It was a Malthusian world because people created about as fast as they procreated. The Industrial Revolution changed all that. And so, but nevertheless, it left this impression that still dominates thinking about the Industrial Revolution. Now, why is that relevant to the question John asked? Because we're getting ready to live it again. We're getting ready to live exactly the same thing again with AI. AI is going to change. I don't know that it'll be as dramatic as the Industrial Revolution, but it's going to be pretty dramatic. And you're going to have opposition to it. Bernie has already taken up the Luddite cause. He's offered a bill in Congress to tax new technology and machines like robots. A typical Luddite response. So what should our regulatory policy be? All I know is there's never been a major technological improvement that didn't increase the well-being of mankind. I'm not fearful of the future. Man is very adaptable, and we're adapting in America to changes right now that are pretty dramatic. And a figure that I use in the book is that 5 million people every month in America are either laid off or quit their job. 5 million. It's almost unbelievable. And 5.1 million jobs are created every month. And they're better jobs, they're higher paying jobs. So you get all these people who are saying, well, hell, we can't all work in computers. There are going to be less people working in computers. We're going to be new jobs we can't even imagine. 60% of all jobs today didn't even exist as a classification at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 1940. I don't know. I'm fearful of what government is going to do. I think Clinton's policy with regard to the internet was enlightened. His policy, I'm hurrying.
No, you're good.
His policy was basically, in dealing with our newest technology, let's use our oldest values. First, do no harm. And I think that ought to be our policy. I'm also worried about all these proposals to have a guaranteed minimum income. I'm not going to get off on it, but trade adjustment assistance, extended unemployment, and our welfare program have done more to discourage transition, make it harder, prolonged it, and induce people not to work. So the last thing we need to do is be getting in the way. But you got to remember, Britain and America in the 19th century had tiny governments, and they were non-interventionist governments. Now we have a huge government, very interventionist, both parties. So I'm almost more worried what government's going to do to AI than what AI is going to do to me.
So chapter 3 goes to the Great Depression, and what are the third myth is what caused and cured the Great Depression. And I think you say something along the lines of it wasn't market failure, it was government failure. You also reference, and I want to get, so to bring it to today, so I want you to discuss your general ideas, but you reference the Federal Reserve started in 1913, kind of went through the 20 recession and then the 29 recession / depression, and they made some mistakes. How are they doing today? They've switched recently from a sufficient reserves policy to an ample reserves policy, and they're about to keep the balance sheet at its current level, so banks have a lot of reserves, which ring true in the book. You talk about how the Fed didn't give the banks enough reserves, or the Fed did not give the local banks enough reserves to make them feel comfortable. So talk about the history of that, but then talk to us about how's the Fed doing today?
Well, my mama and my grandmother went to their grave believing that Franklin Roosevelt got us out of the Depression. So I grew up with this myth. But basically what happened, and it's long, and read the book, please, but we had a panic in 1907. We were an agricultural economy, and so in the fall when farmers planted their crops, and in the spring when they harvested, we had a big demand for money. And there was often people withdrawing money out of banks in the fall and spring and putting the money back when the harvest was done and when the planting was completed and the crop was sold. And often it got out of balance. And so we had a series of financial panics, all of which we survived. In 1907, we had a really bad financial panic. And J.P. Morgan got together with the Treasury and with the big banks in New York and injected liquidity, money, into the banking system. And it stopped the panic, and a massive depression was avoided. Congress was so shaken by the experience, and as the person who authored the Federal Reserve Act said, we're not going to always have J.P. Morgan. They decided to set up a central bank with basically the objective of providing liquidity so that we can avoid these financial panics. When they don't need the money, take it out of the system. When they need it, put it back in the system. And to make a long story short, in 1929, from 29 to 33, the Federal Reserve Bank stood by and watched a third of all the banks in the country go broke. A stock market collapse turned into a financial crisis that turned into a depression. And then you've got huge, verifiably false arguments. The underconsumption, that the problem was in the 1920s, that there was the wealthy had become very wealthy and ordinary people didn't have enough money to spend, and so there was underconsumption. Only when you go back and look at the data from the 1920s, the amount of income going to labor actually went up as a percentage of total income. And in any case, we then had the first the Hoover policies, which were the beginning of the New Deal. People have it down that Hoover did nothing. It's in every high school and college history textbook in the country. It's totally false. Hoover was a massive interventionist, very smart guy, but had this idea the way you help people is don't let prices go down. And so the market couldn't adjust. And then The Roosevelt administration came in with hostility to business. In fact, the League of Nations in 1939 has a long statement in their annual report as to how conditions are bad in America because of the hostility between the president and business. League of Nations data shows that we were in the Depression twice as long as Great Britain. And then this argument that we got out of the Depression because of government spending, we certainly eliminated unemployment when we drafted 14 million people into the Army. But the big argument during the war was that we were going back into the Depression unless we had a massive government spending program because of underconsumption. And as it turned out, we had no spending program after the war. Government spending collapsed. Business was not as afraid of Truman as they were Roosevelt. Investments started to grow. Eisenhower was elected. By 1952, we were back to where we were in 1929. That's basically what happened in the Great Depression.
So I hear that there was a president who was causing massive uncertainty. And
uncertainty and growth are mortal enemies. If you want people to invest their money, you need to have a stable environment, because when people don't know what's going to happen, they sit on their wallet.
So, and then we also had a president who had some bad trade policy, which trade is your next myth.
Well, I didn't even mention about the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which caused world trade to fall in half, and it made the depression worldwide. Thank God, unlike in 1930 with the Smoot-Hawley, where everybody retaliated against us, and it just destroyed the world trading system. This time, people learned from the 1930s, and nobody retaliated. They simply now are out negotiating trade agreements with each other, and it's sort of like when you put a big boulder in the middle of the river just flows around it. Now, China threatened retaliation and ended up cutting a deal, and the Canadians feel betrayed, and they should. I don't think they've been treated fairly, myself. But because they built their whole economy around us. And then we come in, change the rules of the game. But anyway, people didn't retaliate, which has meant that this has been much less destructive than the Smoot-Hawley tariff.
So I want the audience to have time for questions. So I'm just going to ask one more, which means it's going to be on the debt and the deficit, because that's what I do. And then we'll open it up to you. So in 1985, you co-authored Gramm, Rudman, Hollings, which was the Budget Control Act, or the Balanced Budget and Emergency Control Act. It was struck down at the Supreme Court and then repassed out of Congress in '87. Since then, it was then kind of, we had the 1990 Budget Act after that. We had one in 2011. We had the Budget Control Act of just a couple of years ago. None of them were very effective, although I think your legislation early on was probably one of the most effective until it was struck down, or at least it had the promise of being effective. When we look at a debt that's $38 trillion and deficits of over 6% of GDP as far as the eye can see, how do we how do we deal with that? Should we be worried? How bad is that? Let's just leave it there.
Well, first of all, I did Gramm-Rudman because in 1984, it was morning in America. The economy was growing at 4.5% a year. The inflation rate had been brought down from 13% to 4%. The unemployment rate had been eliminated. The Reagan program had worked, and we still had a deficit problem. And I felt that nobody was interested in the deficit problem. So I had this thesis that the problem was that we spent money a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece everywhere, because all of these special interests were looking over the congressman's left shoulder, telling people whether he cared about the poor, the sick, the tired, the bicycle rider, whoever. And nobody was looking over the right shoulder to see if he cared about working people and taxpayers. And so Graham Rudman was trying to force government onto a budget where special interests had to compete against each other. And so a congressman could say, you know, your idea is wonderful, and I really support it, but how am I going to pay for it? Where should I cut? And I felt that would change the whole dynamic. And to get the bill passed the first time, I wanted to put OMB as a certifier of whether the deficit target had been met. But I couldn't get enough people to support that. They wanted the Congressional Budget Office. I was concerned that it wouldn't stand the constitutional test, because then you got a congressional agency ordering an executive branch. And anyway, sure enough, it didn't stand the constitutional test. And the only way I could get it re-triggered was to have it so that the new president could decide whether to continue the law or not. And Clinton won and set it aside. Am I worried about the debt? Yes. Would I have believed in 1981 that it could be as big as it is? No. But in 1981, we had 21.5% interest rates. We had 21.5% interest rates today. It couldn't be what it is, because it would break the back of the government. So I think it is a real problem. I don't know where the magic moment is where things start to come apart. At some point, people are going to question either the willingness or the ability of government to service the debt. You don't go broke by owing money. You go broke when you can't pay the interest on it. And at some point here, if this deficit continues, there's going to be a come to Jesus moment. And then we'll have to do something. And it's important to remember that in the Reagan years, there was a crisis. We had had 9 years of 9.2% inflation. We were in retreat all over the world. The tax rates had risen as inflation drove people in higher and higher tax brackets. So we acted because America was ready for action. We're not ready today, or at least there's no evidence of it at voting yesterday. In democracy, action is taken only when there's a crisis, is sort of my observation. And there will be a crisis, and action will be taken. I'm not selling America short. I've worked all over the world. This is still the greatest country in the world by a big, big margin.
Usually when I read a book, I just read half and put it down. It's my secret. I read all the way through your book, and I thought in my head, I can't pass up the last chapter because I think it's super important on inequality and the measurement of inequality. So why don't you speak on that, and then we're to you.
Well, let me just make 4 points about inequality. One, the census measure of income on which poverty and inequality is based is highly biased by the fact that they don't count government payments in kind as income. So when someone is given a debit card to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, they don't count that as their income. Okay? When government pays their rent, since no cash flows to them, the government does not count that as income. When Medicaid pays their health care bills, the Census Bureau does not count that as income. And the Census Bureau doesn't take taxes into account, so when they get 2 checks from the Treasury, refundable tax credits, those checks don't count as income. So Census Bureau says the income of the bottom 20% of American income recipients is about $29,000. If you count the value of all transfer payments, and I'm not talking about counting the cost of making the transfer, just what they got, valued at cost, it's about $77,000 a year. So the Census Bureau says, and for high income people, it doesn't count taxes. And so the top 20% pay 42% of their income in federal, state, and local taxes. So if you adjust for transfer payments and taxes, the Census Bureau says the top 20% get 16.7 times as much as the bottom 20%. But if you make those adjustments, it's 4 to 1 instead of 16.7 to 1. Now, you can say that's too much, but it's a very different debate. Secondly, there is a lot of bait and switch involved in what you're reading every day about income inequality. You remember the ProPublica expose about Warren Buffett and Bill Gates' taxes. They had stolen the tax returns. And when we looked into it, they were using, as best we can tell, the actual taxes Warren Buffett paid, but they weren't using his income. They were estimating what his income would have been had he sold everything he owned every year and paid taxes on it. And then the final point, there are a lot of really rich people out there. We have a worldwide market now, and some young person with a dynamite idea can become a billionaire almost instantly. But they're not making anybody poorer as a result of it. When you go to Rice and graduate and get out and make 4 times what somebody makes that didn't go to college, you're not taking it away from them. You created it by building up your human capital. And 2 examples. Elon Musk is really rich, but he's made me richer. I had an old system of a whole bunch of wires in my attic so I could get internet way out in the country. And when his little satellite came, no bigger than this table, I get it for $125 a month. It is 1/10 what the old system cost, and it's 3 times as good. So he's rich, but I'm richer as a result of what he's done. And one other example, and think about this in terms of your life, because I think it's very telling. When my granddaughter, my first grandchild, was born, I was in the Senate. And we put $22,000 into her 529 plan to pay for college. And the second year we put $22,000 in, and then I left the Senate, went to work for UBS, and had better options. We quit putting money in. She's now 24 years old. That $44,000, and I got the statement last Thursday, It's worth $498,000. Thank you, Elon Musk. Thank you, Bill Gates. You look at if you're a faculty member, you look at your TIAA CREF. The level of wealth that our system creates is astonishing, and it's broadly shared. Bill Gates at one time owned 7% of Microsoft. Pension funds own 75% of Microsoft. There's not a person in this room, would be my guess, that doesn't have Microsoft in their retirement program. That's how we benefited. So I don't understand this envy. I wish I were rich. I deserve to be rich. If society were just, I would be rich. But I'm not poor because somebody else is rich. It's important to remember, it's an important point to make to your children. Success, nobody gets to the top without taking a lot of people with them. You know, they're not always the people we would choose. They may have made a C- in our economics class, and here they're billionaires, and you ask, well, what is the justice in that? The market is the justice.
All right, we're going to open it up. Any questions? Question?
Speak loud.
Pardon? Yes.
Speak loudly.
Okay.
Yeah, people have yelled at me all these years. I don't hear too good.
My wife and I raised our daughters in Fifth Ward, and I've worked in the community for 38 years, trying to help low-income families build wealth through home ownership, post-secondary skills, financial education, and small business capitalization. My question is, our neighbors and our clients don't know about the vast majority of the 89 federal programs that serve the poor. And it seems like it would be much more efficient if we could distill those down to a knowable and refinable number of a dozen or less. Of the programs with which you're familiar, which do you find to be compelling and efficient enough, or potentially so, to include in that dozen?
Well, I will have to admit that increasingly I've thought about whether we shouldn't just do a cash payment and get rid of all these programs. We spend huge amounts of money providing the benefits. You get these things build up and you say, well, this family's already getting $60,000 worth of benefits, but if you don't give them food stamps, how are they going to buy food? So long ago, Milton Friedman proposed cash welfare. I haven't quite gotten there, but I'm looking hard at it. But it's important to remember when the welfare program as we know it started in 1965, there were 78% of all work-age persons who were poor worked. 78%. That's now down to 36%. And it used to really frustrate me in Congress that we never found a way to help people without destroying some of their incentive to help themselves. And I never discovered the answer to that as to how we could do it.
So on the back cover of your book, it says the opponents of capitalism are ascending. That's one of the quotes. And so this presentation couldn't be more timely with the events of yesterday. And it seems like the newly elected mayor of New York was backed by an association called the Democratic Socialist of America. And on the news today, they talked about all these chapters sprouting up all over the country. So I know, just your opinion, what is going to happen with that? Are they going to take over the Democratic Party? Are they going to form their own party? Or what's going to be the consequences?
Well, the birth-death cycle just constantly wipes out human memory. And the one thing I know, and it's a very serious problem. It's the New York, in a sense, the fact that a person who is really hostile to the system would like to destroy the system that built this country and has plans to do it, is now mayor of the heart of American capitalism. I think some good could come of this because we know his program. Hell, they can't run the transit system charging people. How they're going to run it when it's free, I don't know. And the idea of government running grocery stores and sending social workers instead of police, I don't know. I have a son in New York, in Brooklyn, and I'm hoping, I've tried now for 20 years to get him to move. Maybe this will do it. So I'm a little biased here, but you know, the cure for many things is to let people try it. And I'm not the least bit concerned that it will work. I know it won't work. So we're going to put it to the test. Part of our problem is the two parties have grown so far apart. Yeah. So you end up voting not for the person you're voting for, but because you fear the other person. And the founders wisely tried to make, in the Constitution, take the things that really mattered off the table. Because when elections really matter and the loser won't sit down, the system fails. That's happened all over the world. And so it's something I'm very concerned about, but I don't know how to fix it.
We definitely couldn't have someone run as a Democrat, resign their seat, and then win their House back today, could we? That was Phil Gramm.
Yeah, and you wouldn't.
He ran as a Democrat, so we'll go here and then over here.
Yeah.
Senator Gramm, are you still proud of the fact that you destroyed the Glass-Steagall Act 26 years ago, which led to the biggest blowout in 2008 with the subprime mortgage bailout of $27 trillion to the bank? You talk about welfare.
Okay, that's enough.
That's the biggest.
We're going to let him.
Yeah,
I love the question.
Yes. The answer is yes. I wish that I were as powerful as that criticism implies, but what Gramm Leach Bliley did was it created more competition in banking and insurance and securities, but it deregulated nothing. Banking was still regulated by the same people under the same laws. Security companies were regulated by the same people under the same laws. And the same was true for insurance. So the argument, that's like arguing that Alan Greenspan was the cause of the great financial crisis. He was one of the first and only people who warned the country about the danger of Freddie and Fannie and all this subprime lending. The financial crisis, I was once asked by the head of the People's Bank of China to tell him in one sentence what caused the financial crisis. And my answer was, we loaned a whole bunch of people a whole lot of money that they either couldn't or wouldn't pay back. We set out a policy of making housing affordable by destroying credit standards. And by the time the wheels came off, 50% of all the mortgages being made in America were being made to people who weren't capable of paying it back. And it all worked as long as housing prices were rising. But when the bubble broke, you had a massive default. And Banks were holding all this paper because government encouraged them to hold it by counting it as equivalent to government bonds. And Freddie and Fannie guaranteed all these loans because they had a quota set by Congress. And the quota was 56% of their loans at the end had to be subprime. So again, it's the subprime crisis was caused by subprime lending. The intention was good. Who doesn't want everybody to own a house? I once did a series of polls and discovered the best predictor of whether someone voted for me or not was whether they own their own home. So I had every interest to see people own their own home. But the problem is letting people buy things they can't pay for. And in the end, that almost never works.
So who got the $27 trillion bill?
No, nobody got, listen, we lost more money.
Diamond, maybe?
Yeah, look, well, let me respond, okay? If anybody deserves praise from the financial crisis, it's the Secretary of the Treasury under President Bush, baby Bush, not Papa Bush, that came up with a program where all the money was paid back except the money loaned to General Motors, which had nothing to do with the subprime crisis. Whereas the S&L crisis, we lost huge amounts of money. So I didn't have anything to do with that, and I'm not trying to take credit for it, but you got to give somebody credit for doing something good.
I think that was Hank Paulson, and then followed by Timothy Geithner were the two secretaries in charge.
Yeah, Paulson was the
Paulson
person.
was the. Yes, it's like, and then Ambassador, obviously.
To remind people about Hank Paulson, because there was a huge outcry against the bailout. He went, and the Congress voted against it. He says, well, if we don't get this money, there's going to be martial law. That's a quote. Now, are you, Senator, aware that on Halloween night, the Federal Reserve gave $50 billion in panic money to prop up the repo market, the short-term panic right? Okay, $50 billion in the middle of a government shutdown that's been going on for a month now, sir.
You're talking about right
So I
now?
think,
Right now.
yes.
It's been happening for a couple
Yes.
of months now, the repo market.
And so
No, I
so the
wasn't
biggest
familiar.
welfare, I would submit, the biggest welfare.
With me, I don't. I'm not aware that it happened. No.
It happened.
Now the repo market is hundreds of trillions of dollars, so I don't know what the facts were.
The welfare game out there is Wall Street banks, tipping into the federal till with free money from the Federal Reserve.
It's not free money. The repo market doesn't
Anyway,
work like that.
I wasn't aware of it. I don't know that it happened, but if it did happen, I'd want to know more about it to make a judgment.
Repeal of Glass-Steagall.
No,
The
that.
Fed cannot, the FDIC cannot protect 1%.
No, that's not. So
Well-
actually, if you read the book when he talks about the Great Depression and liquidity in the banking sector, it actually corresponds to what's going on in the repo market right now. So the Federal Reserve has been aggressively trying to shrink its balance sheet post-COVID, and they've shrunk it by over $350 billion. I just heard Jay Powell speak on this, and they have been very concerned about liquidity issues in the repo market because they don't have enough. They don't think they've left enough reserves. That's why they're cutting off reductions in the balance sheet going forward. But this is a problem that he does that's related to fear, companies not investing and companies wanting to hold extra insurance because their profit margins and their balance sheets have been stressed under the current tariffs and uncertainty. But this has nothing to do with a bailout or anything like that. That's not how the repo market works. It's an overnight loan guaranteed by a Treasury document. And so it is something we should all be very concerned about because it can be the cause of structural uncertainty in the financial markets. We have one more question. We're going to go close right here.
Why don't you take young?
It looks like right there. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question for us younger people. So,
Yes.
you know, we've fed so much information all at once now. My first question is with crypto. You say a lot of people sit on money, like me and my buddy here, we're really into stocks and stuff, but with crypto, it's very uncertain. So I want to know your perspective on that. And also, I'm a 1L student at University of Houston. What was the steps of getting into like politics of where I'm at now? I'm just involved in it. And I have no idea how, the whereabouts, you know? So those are my two questions.
I got the first one about crypto, but I didn't get the second.
The steps of going from law school to politics.
Law school to where?
Politics.
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 Following your footsteps.
Okay.
All right.
Let me say with regard to crypto that I don't understand the value proposition. Okay, so it's a free country, and if you want to put your money into it, a lot of people have gotten very rich doing it. But I don't invest what money I have in things that I don't see the value proposition in. So if I had a brother-in-law who wanted to invest in crypto and he asked me my advice, I would tell him, I don't see the value proposition, and I wouldn't do it. But it's free country, and again, it's like a senator once asked me, if you're given, why is it that you're supposed to be so smart and you're not rich? And I responded, well, how is it you're supposed to be so rich and you're not smart? And my chief of staff, when I got back, started poking me in the chest, yelling at me that she was telling me I had to call him and apologize. Dueling with an unarmed man. Politics, my advice about politics is the following. First of all, this is a very great country and deserving of being served. Yes. Okay, I never had a day in public life that I wasn't glad I was there and proud to be there. I left voluntarily, and I think that's something to be said for quitting while you're ahead. But if I were recommending to a young person, my recommendation would be to do well before you do good. Go out and prove yourself in something so that you're not there. There's so many members that being in Congress is their life. And I think an advantage I had is it never was my life. I had a life I could go back to. My dog loved me. And so my advice is, if it is a high calling to be in public office. If you want to do it, I did it because I didn't want to someday be sitting on the front porch of a nursing home wondering, could I have done it? But you should be successful in something else first, is my advice. Then you're more secure, and you've sort of proven yourself. I'm a little suspicious of young people who want to immediately run for public office. Anyway, that's my answer to two questions. I think we're out of time.
Senator, thank you. Thank you all.
I kept looking around. I have a grandson at Rice, and I have not seen him here. And I am there he is. Okay, good. All right, I finally see him way back in the back.
Senator.
I'd like to bring the solution to the whole question we have tonight. Senator Gramm mentioned the Industrial Revolution. That's what we got to get back to. Credit into industry infrastructure. How come the BRICS are building are more powerful than we are? Brazil, Russia,
Thank
India,
you.
China.
Senator will be signing books out in the lobby.